The last quarter kind of got knocked down a little bit because of the federal shutdown and some other things that were going on in the marketplace. But going forward, everybody's expecting a downward adjustment in GDP, but no recession. So, and that's very positive, but definitely slower growth going forward. And you'll see over the long run, the red line there, the long-term GDP growth in the economy's just been a little bit over 2%. And then there's the periods in the most recent time from 2016. You can see the different periods of the expected growth. And you'll also see when you see a downturn in the GDP like that, you're probably seeing it in your sales tax receipts as well. There is a correlation there. This is one of the longest expansions we've had of the economy going back to 1850. And in, I believe, July 1st will be in the longest expansion ever since 1850. One of the problems, though, it's also been the weakest for job growth and just general GDP growth through that. But and there's no expected downturn. So people tend to forget it's been 9 years of growth in the economy. This is just a chart showing how long it is, and we're only 5 months short of the longest economic expansion. As I said, there's some of the reasons for the slowing growth. There's the global economy is weakening a bit. Some of the numbers coming out of Europe and China in particular, their growth is slow. I mean, China had 6% growth, and it's like awful for them, but anybody would be very happy with 6% growth in their economy. But for them, that's quite a drawback for them. There's some other issues. The financial markets have been very unstable the last couple months. A lot of gyrations going on there because of a lot of uncertainty in the future. Rising interest rates has a little bit of a dampening effect, and these are some of the reasons that they've noted for why they expect the slowdown. Consumer confidence as well. I'm not going to go through all of these, but consumer confidence is weakening a bit. It's at a very high level today, so even though it's dropping, it's still at a very high level. In January, there was a fall off from about 98 to about 90, and the equilibrium point for consumer confidence is a rating of about 76. So even being at 90, it's very positive outlook for consumers, but it's falling. So there's a lot of the mindset there. You know, are consumers comfortable to go out and spend? Are they going to shore up? Are they going to save more? Are they going to reduce debt? That's all. They're starting to think that now as this number drops. If we drop into the 80s, then there's going to be more concern next month, and we'll see what happens. The government shutdown, people are concerned about that. That's now over for a while. We'll see. Hopefully it's for a longer term. This is a graph of real consumption and the savings rate for a typical consumer. And as consumer confidence drops and the GDP drops, spending drops, which obviously is 2/3 of the economy is consumer spending. So these are all the things DOB is looking at as they do their projections for the year on revenues. So this is what we had, around 3% growth in 18. They're expecting about 2.4 in 19 and around 2% in 2020 and beyond. Obviously, this is all going to change in 6 months, but these are their estimates for now. So they're projecting out, the financial plan goes out to 2023, so they have to figure out what their revenue picture looks like, and they have to use some sort of a benchmark to determine that. So they're looking at this type of growth. And this is pretty in line with a lot of consensus forecasts of blue chip advisors about future economic growth. Another little drag is the stimulus from the federal tax cut is waning a bit. There's still some positives in 2019. The reductions in the rates is still putting a lot of cash in consumers' pockets in theory. And that you're seeing that consumer spending could increase by about $55 billion in 2019 as a result of the federal tax cut. But the rates are becoming normalized now. Consumers are used to it, and we're moving on. That initial drop last year people saw in January and February because federal withholding was reduced, created an extra boost to the economy, and that's probably why we hit the 3% mark. But that's waning now a little bit. So it's a little bit of a headwind, but we're still in a good place. Nationally, job growth is good, but then again, it's slowing. One of the problems we're having here is, unemployment's below 4%, and businesses are having a hard time finding people to fill the jobs they have open. So you can't hire people that aren't there. There are people coming back to the labor market, have left the labor market, but they just don't have the proper skill set to match up with what businesses need at this time. So that also, this impacts consumer confidence when they see hiring slowing. But when unemployment is so low, you can't expect 300,000 monthly increase in employment. So everything's going to tamp down. And there's the sidebar here that even though we've created 20 million jobs since 2010, it's still the slowest expansion that we've seen. Interestingly, the other slowest expansion for growth and jobs was 2002 to 2007, right after the 9/11 attacks and the recession we had in early 2000. This is probably more of a function of a fundamental shift in our economy than anything else. I mean, the internet really started to take off in the 1990s. You have people that can work from home. They're outside of the traditional labor force. Technology, artificial intelligence, self-driving cars, we're all on the cusp of these things happening, and that all impacts people getting jobs. I used to talk about John Toomey, some of you remember John, about how technology changed a typical flight for him. Whereas in the past, you had to go to a travel agent, or you had to call the airline directly, or you had to get your ticket. If you had a rental car, you had to go see the rental agent. And now you can do all that without even talking to a person. All those jobs kind of disappeared in that process. And technology creates jobs, but it also destroys jobs. And that could be more of a function of why job growth is slow post-1990, post-2000. We'll see what happens. Inevitably, we'll have another recession, and we'll see how the expansion works on the next one. The state is forecasting slow but steady growth. The state job growth, the U.S. job growth is compared there. We tend to lag the national average in New York and have for decades, unfortunately. Still positive. But 1.1% job growth in New York in 2019 is what they're projecting, part of the foundation of the financial plan. The U.S. job growth is slowing a little bit, but proportionally not as much as we're expecting in New York. And having worked at DOB, they tend to be pretty conservative in their revenue estimates, and they don't want to be too rosy when they're putting the financial plan together. So they could be a little bit conservative in these estimates here. In New York State, this is the expectation for 2019 in job creation. You're looking at 104,000 jobs to get to the 1.1. More important is where are the jobs being created. This has been the pattern the last several years, predominantly health and education, the fire sector, professional business services, and leisure and hospitality. But you've got over 60% of job growth in services, pretty much, not counting the business services piece. As they call it in upstate New York, it's eds and meds. That's where your job production is coming from. It's, again, job growth is statewide, it's one thing. New York City is really driving the train here. The Hudson Valley has had some pretty strong job growth. The rest of the state, it's been very, very inconsistent, and it has been for a while. This might be a little hard to see even in your packet, but this is just a graphic that shows the employment growth over the first half of 2018 by region. And obviously, it's much stronger downstate, New York City, Hudson Valley. Even Long Island has struggled a bit in the first part of 2018. The Mohawk Valley and Southern Tier having slower growth. And again, this is just a breakdown of the districts. You can see the numbers on the right there. Yes, you're right. That's pretty slow growth for the most part in most of upstate New York. The box at the bottom, the statewide growth, 1.5%. That's strong growth downstate up to almost 2%, but most of upstate, you're at 0.6%. So in all this context of, the movement of the economy, we have to remember where New York State gets most of its revenue and why the financial plan looks the way it does. 65% of the total tax coming in the state's from income taxes. And a lot of this, as the comptroller mentioned yesterday, I think he said 18% of all PIT comes out of Wall Street. So with bonuses and just salaries and the jobs down there, if they struggle, the state financial plan struggles because the revenues just aren't there. Another interesting statistic, the top 1% of wage earners in New York State accounted for 44% of all New York State adjusted gross income and 80% of realized capital gains. The governor's talked about this, and you may have seen it. The budget directors talked about it. This links back to the federal tax changes last year when they changed the SALT deductions, the state and local tax deductions. It really makes New York more expensive from a taxing perspective. We're less competitive against other states, especially for the extremely wealthy who can move very easily. Some of you may have seen a penthouse just sold in New York City for $238 million. The most expensive home in America. It was actually purchased 2 years ago, but the building's now being finished. Super rich hedge fund guy. He'll probably spend very little time in that apartment. He's also got the most expensive house in Chicago and one of the most expensive homes in London. And he also has the highest price he paid for a house in Miami as well. I don't know what his state of residence is, but the uber wealthy are clearly very mobile, and that becomes problematic for the state because we have a highly progressive income tax code. And you can see just by the stats that are laid out in the financial plan, we're very, very reliant on the wealthy to pay a lot of the personal income tax, which is the foundation of the state's tax base. And these are just a couple of graphs that shows how important the Wall Street is to the economy of New York. The chart on the left shows the number of jobs, but then the amount of wages that they generate off of Wall Street. It's not a huge percentage of total jobs, but it's a huge percentage of total income. And the chart on the right is the expected bonuses that they're put in the financial plan this year. Interestingly, the red bar there is my rough estimation of what they were projecting last year in the financial plan when the budget came out for bonuses. So they're clearly seeing a dip, and obviously December was a disaster for Wall Street, but a lot of that's been recovered in January. So the up and down, and we'll see what happens with the bonuses. As the comptroller said, they get paid out mainly in the first quarter of this year, which is the final quarter of the state fiscal year. So there's a lot of concern in the financial plan, and we'll look at it later, about revenue really dropping off in December and January, and they're not exactly sure why, or they're not telling us why. They may know, but this is another interesting feature about, as important as Wall Street is for the state, something that's been happening in New York City is it's had a huge tech boom down there. And now with Amazon coming, which over the next decade could be another 25 to 40,000, what people would call very good paying jobs, even for New York City, very much tech related. The point of this graphic is historically Wall Street, the growth in Wall Street income and salaries has always been higher than just about every other sector. And actually, since the recession, they're starting to lag behind most other business sectors in job growth. And I think part of that is other IT coming out of the city. And we've actually looked at some of this in sales tax data for New York City, there's a part of the tech boom, some of this product they deliver and they make is taxable for sales tax purposes. And if you were to go back 10 years and look through the quarterly sales tax data for that type of industry, it doesn't even show up on the radar, like in the top 20 of products produced. You come to 2018, it's in the top 10. So they're producing a lot of digital goods out of the city, which is balancing out. So maybe can Wall Street weaken in the future and we're okay? Are we offsetting with another industry? The city is clearly diversifying its economy a bit, but we still live and die by Wall Street revenues. Housing starts, they expect to be relatively modest. They've kind of fallen off towards the end of the year here. But, you know, not a great thing in the future, but they're not seeing a drop off. So housing obviously is a big part of economic growth in the state. So there's the other issue too. This is the same problem we had last year. There's always uncertainty in a financial plan. You never know what Washington's going to do. The shutdown hurt directly for federal workers in the state. The funding decisions they make down there, less money coming into the state, that all impacts the financial plan. They have to make adjustments. They have to estimate over the next 4 years what we expect in revenues. And as I said before, will these super wealthy start leaving the state because they could go to Florida where there's no income tax? Somebody making $500 million a year, paying 9% here, could increase their salary by, their take-home pay by $45 million by moving. Tiger Woods moved to Florida. He used to live in California, so when he was making $100 million a year in endorsements, he saved $10 million doing that. So there's that unknown challenge, and we're so top-heavy on the revenue side with personal income tax. You know, what's going to happen in the future? We just don't know.